right, boys and girls. So we just finished our science unit on farms, and so today we're starting a new social studies unit on Native Americans, and this is one of my favorite ones, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun. When we come back to school, we'll have some projects and stuff to do with it. All right, so let's get started with our reading. Get nice and comfy, because you know it takes a few minutes. Let's get started. Long ago, long before you and I can remember, and long before your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents can remember, there were no people living on the land we live today. There were woods and there were plains. Plains are big, flat areas of land. Turn the page. And there were rivers and there were lakes, but no people. And there were deserts and mountains, but no people. And there were plenty of birds and fish, but no people. And there were animals. And there were animals like this cute bunny rabbit and insects, but there were no people. But that was thousands of years ago and much earlier than any of us can remember. And the first known people to live in America, in the land that we live in, are people called Native Americans or American Indians. And they lived in all parts of the country. Some lived in the desert, others lived in the mountains, and some lived in the woods, and some lived on the coast by the ocean. And people of the desert lived very differently from the people who lived on the coast. Why do you think that they would live different here where it's hot and dry compared to here where it's cooler and they have the ocean? Well, we're going to learn about all the different ways that Native Americans lived. And Native Americans of long, long ago, they also needed all the things that we need to live. They needed shelter, they needed clothes to protect themselves, the shelter to protect them from weather, wild animals, and they needed food and water. But the desert people, I don't have to change yet, the desert people ate food that was different from people at the ocean. Can you imagine why? There's fish here, and there is no fish here. That's one thing that's different. And the houses that they lived in were very different because they were different for the weather and where they lived. And so let's look at some of their houses. Some of their houses were teepees. You probably recognize teepees. And some of them lived in houses called weetus, and those are like big pieces of tree bark, and they're bent over and around. And some lived in houses called hogans. You can see these are people who lived in wooded areas with trees. And people who lived in hogans, that looks like desert living, doesn't it? You can see cactuses and sagebrush, and it's dry, and their house is made with mud. And some lived in pueblos. There's more desert living. And others lived in houses called longhouses. And they're long wooden houses, and you can see there's snow. So this isn't in the desert anymore, is it? That's more like in the mountains or wooded areas where they would have snow. And Native Americans of long ago had to rely on their knowledge of nature, the earth, the plants, and the animals that surrounded them, and everywhere they roamed, the Native Americans found ways to borrow or use from the earth that they needed to live. Some Native Americans grew their own vegetables and fruit. Oh, there he is, gardening his corn. And others, they hunted buffalo. And around here, like if you've been to Yellowstone, it's really close. You've probably seen some buffalo, and I know some of you are saying, I've been to Yellowstone, because we've talked about that before. And some Native Americans hunted animals in the woods. You can see there he is with his bow and arrow. And some caught fish from rivers, lakes, and oceans. And after they caught their food, they had to cook it, right? And so some of them cooked their food. What do you need to cook your food? You need heat. And so they cooked their food over the fire. And some made special ovens. Ooh, this oven is called a Hopi oven. and they baked their food in their specially made ovens. And the Native Americans also needed water. We all need water to drink, right? But there were no sinks with running water inside their homes. They didn't have plumbing, they didn't have electricity. So where do you think the Native Americans found water? They collected rainwater. They also got water from lakes, rivers, and streams. Native Americans from long ago, they didn't have cars or trucks, did they? No, they weren't invented. There were no buses or trains or planes. So how do you think they got around? Well, their feet. Long ago, Native Americans traveled by foot. There were no paved roads. Native American paths were made by pounding with their own footsteps and the hooves of their animals in herds. So they had to walk everywhere. Could you imagine if we had to walk everywhere that we went? I don't think we would want to go very far, huh? And after Native Americans were here for many years, they started riding horses. And after that, some traveled on horseback. So they were able to travel a little farther and a little faster. And others traveled in canoes. We still travel by boat today, don't we? And those who lived in the woods used their feet to make their way through thick forests of trees. And after many years, those who lived on the open plains welcomed the speed of horses to carry them long distances. And those who lived near lakes and rivers relied on canoes to carry them across the water. And no matter where they lived, Native Americans made all of their own clothes because they didn't have stores to go to, did they? No, they didn't. So they had to go to the store. They had to go to the store. They didn't have stores, so they had to make their own clothes. Did you guys make your own clothes today? Probably not. Maybe if your mom sews, but you probably went to the store and bought your clothes or ordered them online. They didn't have that either. Some Native American women and girls wore skirts and dresses. Men and boys often wore breechcloths and leggings. They used materials from their surroundings to make their clothes. Some Native... Gonna have to fix our book a little bit. There we go. I don't want it to fall down. And some Native American wore clothing made of animal skins: elk, deer, buffalo, and rabbit. They often decorated their clothing with beads, porcupine quills, and fringe. And during the cold winter months, they wore coats of animal fur to stay warm. Others wore clothes made from the soft inner bark of the cedar tree. Could you imagine if your clothes were made of bark from a tree? And sometimes they decorated their clothes with seashells. So their clothes look very different than our clothes do today. And still others wore clothing made of fibers from different plants, cotton and yucca, and trimmed them with animal bones. In the winter, they covered themselves with cloaks to stay warm. That would be like our jackets. So you gotta wear your jacket to stay warm. And their shoes, many men, women, and boys and girls of each Native American tribe, from the oceans to the plains to the woods, wore moccasins on their feet. You probably have seen moccasins before. But some, however, prefer to be bare feet. But if it's really cold or really hot, you've got to cover up your feet and protect them. So, as you can see, the people who came to live in this rich and varied land, that means lots of different places, that we call the United States, were just as rich and varied on their own. All the people were different. And they were alike in some ways and different in other ways, just as the people of America are today. All right, so that's our introduction to our Native Americans and some of the things that we're going to be learning about. We have a worksheet that everybody has in their packet that you'll be able to answer the questions. So there's 2 pages, and I have a marker, and I will talk about the instructions, what you guys are going to do. And so draw a picture of Native Americans needed in order to live. Okay, so they needed clothing. So in this first box you can see a shoe. But you can draw a picture of their clothing. You could draw like a dress that the women would have worn, or the pants or leggings that men would have worn, or the cloaks that they would have worn in the winter time. So you could draw a picture of their clothes. Food. This is looks like an ear of corn. And for the food, what did they eat? We talked about buffalo. We talked about them growing their own food. We talked about them catching fish. So you could draw any of those pictures in here for food. And shelter. We talked about their different kinds of houses. There were teepees, there were long houses, there were the Weetus, the Hogans, all kinds of different houses. And if you need to go back and look at the pictures to see what kind of houses there were, you can do that. And draw a picture of the shelter here. And then down here, it says, circle the items to show how the Native Americans got their food. Okay, so we talked about getting their food. Remember, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have cars, they didn't have stores. So how did they get food? Did they farm? Oh, yes, they did. They farmed. They grew their own food. Some of them did. There's a picture of a buffalo. It says they hunted. Did they hunt? Yes, they did. So you're going to circle there. And here's a picture of a cell phone. They called. They called up and ordered, could I have 2 cheeseburgers and french fries, please? Did they do that? Mm-mm. So we're going to leave this one. And there's a boat, because you used a boat on the water and they fished. Did Native Americans fish for their food? Yes, some of them did. Those that lived by water, the Native Americans in the desert, they probably didn't do so much fishing. They didn't have water in the desert. Not in lakes and streams or ocean, but the ones that lived near the water, they would fish. And here's the last one. They shopped. Did they go over to Ridley's and go grocery shopping? They didn't have it, so we're just going to leave that one there. And then, when you are finished with this page, come over to your second page, and it says, what type of Native American house would you want to live in, and why? So you're going to choose the kind of house that you would like to live in. And they give you a couple examples. They give you 2 examples. There's a teepee and a longhouse. And you can choose, circle the one that you would like to live in. Draw me a picture of you living in that house. And then you can write on the line why you would like to live in that house. Everybody got it? Okay. So you can go back and you can listen to the story and look at the pictures if you need them. And then go ahead and finish your worksheets. I hope you have fun. See you tomorrow, guys.